Okay, we're going to resume now with part 2 for Ben Emlyn-Jones' talk on Exopolitics, the path to disclosure. So a big round of applause for Ben. And then we'll do some questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Welcome back. Those of you standing, I'm sorry we ran out of seats. It was just too many people, and next time I think we need a bigger venue, and I'm sure Neil will sort that out. So I hope you're all comfortable. Right. So what happens next? We've gone through the story of Sir Eric Gary, Uncle. His people used to call him Uncle. He was the first Prime Minister of Grenada. And the Gary Initiative, just to recap, ended with the United Nations itself accepting UFOs as a serious phenomenon, a reality that needed to be dealt with by the human race. And there was a resolution that was passed in 1978, meaning the UFO phenomenon is real and needs to be dealt with, and it's there in its very, very documentation. The Gary Initiative could have gone much further if it hadn't been for the coup in Grenada, which ruined everything. But that wasn't the end of the story. All is not lost. Other people picked up where Sir Eric left off. The Gary Initiative could have gone a long way. It didn't. But we're not giving up. Other people are carrying on, including ourselves. And this man in particular, the man you're seeing now, this here is Timothy Good. Now, he is one of the most prolific UFO authors in history. He's written a whole series. I think he's written over 20 books, and they're really, really good. They're all quite similar. They don't have each one doesn't have a particular narrative arc. They're more like an analysis of certain cases. Yet they're all excellent. They're really interesting, and they're really worth reading. Now, this book came out in 1986. So that's not long after Sir Eric returned to Grenada. Now, but this book has turned out to be absolutely a definitive ufology book, one of the most important ever. It's not his only book. It's not Timothy Good's only book. It's not even his best book. But it is the best-selling, and it seems to have been something of a milestone. And it has changed people's lives, including a couple of case studies I'm going to give you. The book is called Above Top Secret. And it is unique in several ways. It was the first ever book that published the famous Majestic 12 documents. Now, these are documents that were sent on microfilm to a ufologist called Jamie Chandray. When he developed them, he saw that they were copies of paper documents supposedly issued by the US government, putting together an organization, a secret organization reporting to the president called Majestic 12, consisted of 12 people whose job it was to analyze the wreckage and the evidence of the Roswell crash. Now, a lot has been written about the Majestic 12 documents. Are they real? Are they false? I've sort of wavered between one and the other. However, the recent revelations by Bill Wood are particularly interesting because he has worked out that the documents were typed. He's worked out what kind of typewriter was used to create these documents. It was a Remington 320. Now, there's only 5 Remington 320s left in the world, and they're all in museums. It's a very old form of typewriter, even older than the more recent ones before the electronic age. So if someone faked the MJ12 documents, they must have gone to get hold of a Remington 320 typewriter. Must have nicked one from a museum and used that. So, did they? Well, it's possible, but it seems unlikely. So this is a very, very important book. When this book came out, it really focused a lot of public attention on the UFO issue at a time when it really needed it. And now we come to this fine figure you see before you, Dr. Stephen Greer. Yes, indeed. And he's a physician, and as he says, I'm just a country doctor from North Carolina. Very, very, very modest man indeed. Incredibly modest. Yeah, now he has founded what's called the Disclosure Project in 1990. And this, what he did was he gathered a number of witnesses. He gathered a number of people together from the world of ufology, from the world of the military, government service, aviation, intelligence, and many, many other official positions, they had encounters with UFOs and evidence relating to UFOs. They've been sworn to secrecy, but they've been decided to go public. And he wrote several books. He wrote one called Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge. He wrote another book, which is a list of these witness testimonies. And he also filmed several hours of footage, which were interviews with these witnesses. And you can actually watch that footage on YouTube. He's put it together into a documentary. Very, very interesting to watch indeed. And on the May the 9th, 2001, he hosted the Disclosure Project press conference at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. The very same room, incidentally, which 12 years later would host the citizen hearing, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. Now, this is a very, very interesting event. Now, this was streamed live on the internet, and 20,000 people watched it. At that time, that was a record. It was the most popular, most widely watched live stream ever in the internet's history. Now, that's not much by today's standards, but back in 2001, the internet was very different. It's come on a long way since then. And back in 2001, streaming events live online was actually quite rare. And never ever had a live stream ever had 20,000 views. This was really quite amazing. Now you see Dr. Greer himself opening up the event at the National Press Club. It lasts a couple of hours. You can watch it on YouTube. It's a very, very interesting witness testimony. I'm going to focus on some of the most interesting of all. This witness is John Callahan. He was head of the Federal Aviation Administration of the United States Accident Investigation Task Force. His job was to look into all adverse incidents that happened in the air over the United States of America and work out exactly what went wrong and how to prevent it. He had many, many UFO encounters he had to deal with, including a very, very interesting event in 1986, the same year that Above Top Secret was published, involving a Japanese a Japanese cargo plane, a 747, and the pilots encountered off the coast of Alaska a huge discus-shaped object, a very, very bulky disc, 10 times the size of their aircraft. And it says a Boeing 747, a big plane. And he had to deal with that. And he, like all the other witnesses you're going to hear, is willing to go in front of Congress and will testify under oath. They've also signed affidavits, which basically means that what they're saying is telling the truth. They're telling the truth in these affidavits. And if they happen to be lying, then they get into enormous trouble legally. These people have no motivation to make up what they're saying. No motivation at all. They are telling the truth. They have no reason to lie at all. This is Lieutenant Colonel Charles Brown. He was a World War II veteran, and after the war he got involved in Project Sign and Project Grudge and Project Blue Book. Now these were 3 operations by the US Air Force to investigate UFOs. Now Project Blue Book finally closed in 1969, and its conclusion was basically nothing to see here, move along. UFOs are of no defense significance, they're non-existent, or just we don't really bother with them anymore. And Colonel Brown disagreed with that assessment, and he's speaking out very bravely now, speaking out and explaining how he disagrees with the conclusion of Project Blue Book, and he believes a cover-up was put in. He believes the whole of Project Blue Book was just set up to fail. Very, very interesting indeed. And ever since 1969, the official government position, which was revealed in 2011 via the disclosure petition number 2, that's a big story behind that. But basically, they said that ever since 1969, the US government has no official position on UFOs, and they have never investigated them since. That's a lie, and we know it's a lie now, and I'll say more about that at the end. This is Captain Robert Salas. Now, what is it the skeptics always say about UFO believers? They often say we're mentally ill in some way. Schizotypal disorders is one of the words they often use. It's we're not quite all there. We've got a screw loose. We've got a few bats in the belfry. You know, we're not. Our mental health is questionable. Well, this chap did a job by which his mental health, or the fundamental nature of his job, meant that his mental health was of prime concern. It was very carefully monitored, very carefully screened, more than anyone else in the world. Captain Robert Salas was part of the US Nuclear Deterrence Missile Combat Crew. His job was to actually sit in his bunker. It's called a capsule, 60 feet under the ground. And if the message came through from the president to launch the nuclear missiles of America's nuclear deterrent, he would do it. He would press the buttons and the missiles would be on their way. And he would definitely do it if that order came through. He was trained in it so much, he was desensitized to the point that he said, if ever that order came through, I would have pressed the button, the missiles would be gone before anyone even knew about it. This is I met Captain Salas at Homefirth at the UFO Truth magazine conference a few years ago, and he told me about his job. He said it was very boring, which was good, because if it ever got interesting, it would be his last day on Earth, and it would be everybody's last day on Earth. The idea that this man somehow had a screw loose and was allowed to do that job is preposterous and insulting to him, and it's insulting to our intelligence. If he ever got a screw loose, it would be the end of the world, because he was the guy who launched the missiles. I would really ask the skeptics to think carefully before they say things like this, because it's not just an insult to Captain Salas. It is an insult to our intelligence, and it makes them look stupid. It's embarrassing to see them discredit themselves so much with such a ridiculous statement. Okay, the UFO witnesses are all kinds of people, and some of them are the sanest people in the world, because they're the people whose mental health is cared for more than anyone else in the world. This guy had an encounter with a UFO. He was in his bunker underground, and some objects with red lights on appeared outside his missile launching facility, and suddenly all the missiles shut down, and it took a couple of weeks to get them started again. This is Karl Wolf, and he worked for NASA, as did this lady, Donna Hare. Now, their job was to produce images, basically to process images from the US space program for publication in scientific journals and the media, especially moon missions. Their jobs was to take photographs taken on lunar expeditions and to make sure they were okay to put out to the public and to the scientific community. Now, what these two people have said is that when these photos were handed to them unedited, raw, they had artificial structures on them. Now, this was on the dark side of the moon. It's called the dark side of the moon. It's not dark. It receives just as much sunlight as the near side of the moon, the light side, if you like. But it's called the dark side because it faces away from the Earth all the time. We can only ever see one side of the moon. So if, for example, you're an extraterrestrial civilization that we're investigating the Earth, it's the perfect place to put a base because it's one of the few places in the universe that is completely invisible to the Earth, no matter how good a telescope you have. It's also very close to the Earth, in cosmic terms. So it's the perfect place to put your base. You could have your base there, no one on Earth could see it. So you'd be able to sit there quietly and no one would ever know you were there. So when these various craft, these probes, went around to the far side of the moon, they saw artificial structures, domes, towers, city-like structures, definitely artificial, on the dark side of the moon. Now, when these photographs came back to NASA, Karl Wolf and Donna Hare were told to basically edit out these particular images. They had to edit out these structures, and to do that, they used a paintbrush, an airbrush. Sorry, they used a sticky tape. They used sticky labels to cover it over. They had to cut them out and basically composite the photo so that they were basically you couldn't see these artificial structures. And then they were finally presented to the media for publication. So basically, NASA were editing this stuff out so that people wouldn't know about it. People wouldn't know that these things were there. Now, these structures, we don't know whether they're extraterrestrial or they're man-made and they're part of the secret space program, or maybe a combination of the two. Either way, NASA were keeping it quiet. They were suppressing it so that we wouldn't find out about it. This is Larry Warren. He is one of the principal witnesses to the Rendlesham Forest UFO incident of 1980, and he's the first whistleblower, the man who got the word out. If it wasn't for him, we wouldn't even know that event had taken place, or it might be just some rumour, which might have happened. Despite many vociferous claims to the contrary, I think this guy's story is real. He is telling the truth, and there's actually a documentary coming out called Capel Green. It's a feature-length documentary about this man, so do stay tuned for that. It's very, very interesting indeed. This is George Feiler. He used to be he was a fighter pilot, and one day he was flying his jet-powered, his fighter jet, very, very fast aircraft, and he received orders. He was at 10,000 feet. He received orders to dive immediately to 3,000 feet at high speed and pursue a UFO. This is very dangerous if you've got a jet aircraft and you're diving very quickly to that low altitude. You could misjudge your descent and go straight into the ground. So it was a considerable risk. He put himself to pursue this UFO. When he got to the correct altitude, the UFO just zipped away and he couldn't follow it. It was going too fast. And he's speaking out now. He swore to secrecy. He signed his security documents. He took his oaths but he's decided to speak out publicly and will do so in front of Congress under oath if necessary. This is Carol Rosin. Now, her testimony is the most interesting of all because she knew Werner von Braun. Now, Werner von Braun is the man for whom the term rocket scientist was coined. Werner von Braun actually worked for Nazis in Germany, designing the V-1 Doodlebug, a cruise missile, and the V-2 ballistic missile, the first liquid-powered rocket that was used as a weapon. And these two weapons caused devastation in Britain in particular during World War II. And after the war, he was assigned to the United States under Project Paperclip and worked for NASA designing the Apollo rockets and other of NASA's spacecraft. Now, he died in 1977, but before he died, he told his friend Carol Rosin several very, very interesting things. First of all, he predicted the end of the Cold War, a full decade before it happened. He also said that after the Red Commie menace had passed from the Earth, we would need another danger to make us feel unsafe and to unite us behind government policy. And he said that would be terrorists, rogue nations, nations of concern. How did he know? This was all these years before 9/11. How did he know that was going to happen? Werner von Braun must have had insider knowledge to make that prediction. And he said, after the terrorists, they'd play the last card. The last card, Carol, he said, is the extraterrestrial threat, aliens. First it would be asteroids, and he says, but then it will be the UFOs. And he says, you must stop the weaponization of space, he said to her. He said that weapons being put into space have got nothing to do with protecting people from missiles, because this is how it was justified at first. During the Cold War, we had the Star Wars program, and this was also mirrored in the Soviet Union. They had their own version of that. Of course, the Cold War ended, but now they're talking about Son of Star Wars or Mini Star Wars and all these other little things they're planning. He said it's got nothing to do with protecting our nation from missiles. It's also got nothing to do with shooting out asteroids as well. It is designed to weaponize space so that the government will have complete control both over the surface of the Earth and what lies beyond it, and also a false flag attack that could start an interplanetary war. And he said that interplanetary war would be the ultimate, what David Icke calls problem, reaction, solution to unite the world behind a single tyrannical government. On the Disclosure Project press conference took place on the 9th of May 2001. On the September the 11th, 2001, this happened. And again, as with the Gary Initiative, everything was forgotten. All the progress that was made by the Disclosure Project press conference was immediately eliminated as the world dropped what it was doing and focused on these two towers as they turned into clouds of dust. And the world was at war again, exactly as Werner von Braun said it would be, with terrorists, with nations of concern. The war on terror began. Trillions of pounds were spent on defence, and the rest is history. Now, I said earlier that I didn't believe that the Bishop coup in Grenada was actually engineered specifically to stop the Gary Initiative. The question has to be, was 9/11 engineered specifically to stop the Disclosure Project press conference and the impetus that generated? Quite possibly, partly. There are probably several reasons why 9/11 was done. This might be one of them. Then again, it could be that, again, it was serendipity on the part of the keepers of the truth embargo. They may be saying, it made me think, oh, thank goodness that happened. Phew, we were really worried there. Question is their luck going to run out? I hope so, if it is luck. But things continue. Again, we haven't given up. Here we have Dr. Stephen Greer having a debate with Dr Cassidy. Now, you can get this on YouTube, and I do recommend it. It's very, very entertaining indeed if you like internet blood sports, because this really is the battle of the two biggest egos in ufology coming head to head. It's the clash of the titans. Now, this is a very, very heated debate here between these two people. Stephen Greer, the Disclosure Project, now he did a speech saying that basically that aliens are all wonderful beings. They're all lovely. They're all beautiful. They're all spiritual. And they're all nice. And they only intend good. The only bad kids on the block are humans. All the evil in the universe is here down on Earth. Now, Dr Cassidy disagreed with him And she said so quite bluntly that that's not the case. Kerry's actually quite right. The extraterrestrials are not all nice. Some of them are. Some of them are beautiful and wonderful and lovely, just like Greer says they are, but not all of them. The majority appear to be fairly neutral. It appears we're under some kind of dispassionate observation. But there is a minority that are harmful. I'll say more about that later on, but there is a minority that actually do seem to intend us harm, or at least are doing harm to us, whether they do so intentionally or not. But so Kerry is actually quite right here. But this Greer wasn't having any of it, and they led to a massive, great big fight. And you see, Dr. Greer here is boasting again, you see. A likely story, Steve, a likely story. And Kerry doesn't look very impressed, does she? She can see through it. Now, Dr. Stephen Greer has actually made several films. I mentioned the witness testimony from the Disclosure Project. But this is another one called Sirius. It's more recent. Now, this is actually pretty good. I mean, there's lots of shots of Dr. Greer himself wearing tight jeans. But then I expected that. But when the camera does cut away from his royal Greerness, sitting there with his legs spread, you actually do get some interesting information on here, including a tiny little alien body known as the Atacama humanoid. Things like that. It's all very interesting stuff. I don't agree with everything he says. I don't trust Dr. Stephen Greer completely for various reasons, which I can't go into now. But I would say, do go and watch it. It is worth watching. Now, this is Stephen Bassett. Now, this is another man involved in the disclosure movement. This is a guy I actually hold him in far higher esteem than I do Dr. Stephen Greer. Bassett is part of he runs what's called the Paradigm Search Group, which is just like the Disclosure Project. Although instead of focusing on the witnesses and the witness testimony, he focuses on the politicians, the people in government who have the ability to change the course, or he believes have the ability to change the course of where this truth embargo is going. And he's dedicated his life to doing this. Now, he's spending a lot of time in Europe now because he believes with the election of Trump, America's a lost cause. I mean, I don't think that's the case particularly, but he does see it that way. But he's very, very dedicated. He's a good guy. I've had him on my radio show several times. Very interesting kind of things he has to say. In 2013, Stephen Bassett, along with Grant Cameron and several other people, organised the disclosure, the ET citizen hearing on ET disclosure. This was in 2013. This is at the National Press Club in the very same room that 12 years earlier, the Dr. Greer's Disclosure Project press conference had happened. This was streamed live online, and I watched it. It was very, very good. I mean, it was actually quite gripping. And because of the time difference between Washington, D.C. and my country, it began just when I was finishing work. So I could get home. I got home from work, switched this on, I'd watch it all evening. And I really got hooked on it. It lasted a week. I quite missed it when it was over, actually. Really, really good, really interesting. What he did was he got a group of 6 members, former members of the US Congress, not serving members, former members, and he paid them privately to carry out a mock congressional investigation, exactly the kind they used to have, they would have had if they were still in Congress. And they would run it exactly the same way, interview, ask questions of the various witnesses, things like that. And here we have a number of people speaking here. There's Dr. Stephen Greer and Stephen Bassett talking at the National Press Club, addressing the former members of Congress. And here we have, that's Gary Heseltine on the left. He runs UFO Truth magazine, a very good publication. I write for it, so I'm biased, but it is a good publication. That's Peter Robbins next to him. Peter Robbins is the co-author of Left at Eastgate, a book written by Larry Warren. Now, Peter Robbins, unfortunately, has now disavowed that publication, but I think that's a big mistake on his part. Now, behind this row of activists, you have to have the theoreticians. And this guy's one of the best theoreticians in the business. This is Richard Dolan. Now, Richard Dolan is an interesting character indeed, actually, because he began his academic career in quite a conventional way. He was studying history and political science at Oxford University. He was actually shortlisted for a Rhodes Scholarship, which he didn't get, but maybe that's for the best. Well, that's a long story there. Now, this man's life changed when he read a copy of Above Top Secret by Timothy Good, that book I told you about a little while ago. He was just in the middle of his history and political science course he was doing, and he decided to do a module on UFOs. It was just a very, very brief, short study, and he read the Above Top Secret was one of his research textbooks. But by the time he finished that module, his life had changed, and he decided to just, he realised the importance of UFOs, and he never expected to come to this conclusion. It was only when he looked at the evidence he realised how important it all was, and he dropped everything and he decided to become an exopolitician, which is what he is today. So in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, I think we have a saucer in the hangar, to once again quote His Royal Popeness. Indeed. Nick Pope uses the term saucer in a hangar as in an ironic sense. And he actually believes that, as the head of the MOD's research project, he actually believes that that if they did have a saucer in a hangar, they'd tell him. He'd know about it because he was head of the Ministry of Defence's UFO desk. Britain's Fox Mulder he is, don't you know? I actually personally think if I was the keeper of the truth embargo and I had a saucer in the hangar, Nick Pope, the public face of British ufology, the man who's always on television talking about it, is the last man in the world I would tell. Nick Pope is never going to be initiated into these secrets, not a man in his position. Now, the saucer in the hangar comes from the fact that sometimes these craft crash. These artifacts of extraterrestrial civilizations, they come to grief on the Earth's surface, they're secretly salvaged by the government, and then the government then put in a cover story. It was a weather balloon, it was this, that, or the other, anything other than what was real. They seal off the area, they put out the cover story, they clear away the evidence, they salvage everything they can, and then they just open it up and they pretend nothing happened. They did this most famously in July of 1947 at Roswell, New Mexico. But Roswell is not the only Roswell. And by that I mean that the word Roswell, of course, refers to the city of Roswell, New Mexico. But it's only a matter of time before the Oxford English Dictionary introduces that word as a common noun to refer to these kinds of events, which is a whole sector of ufology. There are many other Roswells, and they often have qualifying titles such as the Welsh Roswell, the Brazilian Roswell, etc., the Russian Roswell. There were even Roswells before Roswell. Before 1947, there were several events like this. Yes, I think this is the truth. Now, what the government is keeping from us is what's known as the truth embargo. This is the secret that there is an extraterrestrial presence engaging the human race, and the government has very decisive evidence that this is the case. This is a policy they've maintained for many, many decades, and they have maintained it in a dedicated and very, very single-minded way. It is a policy under which they are completely unanimously, obviously unanimously agreed to. This is why changing that policy is going to be extremely difficult. So what are they? Well, this is actually a picture from the Roswell Museum. If you go to Roswell today, there's a whole tourist industry built up around the Roswell incident. Now, the skeptics always go on about how tacky this is and how awful that this city is actually exploiting this mythology, as they say, for its profit. In Mark Pilkington's book on the subject, Mirage Man, there's about 5 pages dedicated to saying how disgusted he is by all the touristy tat you find, the little glowing green aliens and things like that, and all the various books and things like that, and the alien-shaped light street lamps and things like that in Roswell. And I think the skeptics always say that, but then you could make the case that Stratford-on-Avon shouldn't be exploiting William Shakespeare for their own profit, should they? It's part of their history, isn't it? It was his hometown. These skeptics should go to the Stratford-on-Avon and say, get rid of all that Shakespeare stuff. Close down all the theatres. Shut the tourist shops. Get rid of those hotels. Throw away all that touristy tat. Those leather-bound scripts of Romeo and Juliet. Those you should gift wrap. Those glow-in-the-dark Hamlet skulls. Throw them away. What? We can't have any town on earth, making money out of its own history. It's immoral. But of course, they never say that, do they? So that is the Roswell incident. Yeah, there's more than one Roswell incident, definitely. So are we going to see this? Are we going to see old Trumpy coming out on the podium one day? This is what Stephen Bassett wants. Coming out on the podium and saying it. My fellow Americans, I'm here to tell you that we are not alone. There are UFOs out there, and we've known about it for a long time. And we forgot to tell you. I'm really sorry. Knowing him, it will probably be on Twitter first, won't it? Or what about the Wicked Witch of Westminster? Is she going to come out and say this? Now, again, this is what Bassett wants. He just wants this official acknowledgement there's an extraterrestrial presence engaging the human race. Now, there are many, I disagree with Bassett on an awful lot of this. I don't think it's going to be as straightforward as he thinks. Now, it's true that disclosure is an irresistible force, and the immovable object is the truth embargo. However, the clash of these two things is not going to go the way he thinks it is. It's not going to be as straightforward as this. I cover that in my books. And to be honest, there's a lot of internal conflict within me on this issue. There's a part of me that understands this. I say to myself, it can't be done. They can't make a confession like this. I'll explain more about that in a minute. But basically, the political structures of this world don't have the capacity to absorb a revelation of this magnitude. Where the people are just so, the popular culture and the popular mindset and the popular image of what is possible and impossible is so divorced from reality that an injection of reality of this magnitude, this level, will just be too much. I mean, people go berserk over duck ponds and expenses and things like that. You know, we've been conditioned to make hay over nothing. How are we going to possibly cope when they come they come out with this truth? So if disclosure is going to happen, but it's not going to happen like this, I don't think. There's so many issues associated with disclosure, the disclosure of this UFO issue, and it goes way beyond the UFO phenomenon, totally beyond it. And partly this is to do with energy. Andrew Johnson has spoken about this here. So several other people have mentioned this. Now, if extraterrestrial craft are coming from Zeta Reticuli, from other dimensions, or wherever it is they come from, to Earth, they're not doing it on Texaco unleaded 4-star. They are using a power plant and propulsion system of a type beyond anything we have the capability, or, let me put it another way, we officially have the capability of building within what is publicly allowed in the scientific realm. It's obviously something based on free energy and anti-gravity. The extraction of energy from the zero-point field, there's massive amounts of energy within the very fabric of the universe itself, and the ability to control gravity, which means you wouldn't need these big, dangerous, loud, noisy rockets chugging their way laboriously up into low Earth orbit, which is about as far as they can go, carrying any significant payload. You would have something that could actually almost drive as effortlessly as a car along the road, driving up into space. And the reason it goes beyond the UFO phenomenon is because free energy and anti-gravity has been invented not just by aliens, by humans. Humans have invented it. We think we're behind the aliens if the aliens are technologically way ahead of us. Not really. They are. All that's happening is that we've discovered the same technology that these aliens use. The difference is the power structures of the Earth are keeping it secret. The aliens are not. That's the only difference. The power structures of this world are keeping, as the breakaway civilizations, Richard Dolan calls it, keeping it for their own uses and not letting the rest of us have it. And that's why it appears we have less technology than we do in this world. Now, so this stuff's been invented by humans. What's more, it was invented by humans more than 50 years before Roswell. Have you heard of Nikola Tesla? He's had documents that were classified in the late 19th century because he was revealing free energy to the world back then. J.P. Morgan, the famous banker and industrialist, tricked Tesla and eventually ruined him, along with the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds and all the power brokers in the world, because they basically said, to quote Morgan himself, if I can't put a meter on it, I don't want it. Tesla wanted to give free energy to the world, and if he had succeeded, the world we were living in now would be almost magically transformed. We would have entered the free energy age even before we entered the modern age of oil. In those times, coal was the principal fossil fuel, and people weren't using oil in big quantities. Instead, we have been deliberately corralled down this technological cul-de-sac where we use Stone Age. We're burning chemicals in a Stone Age manner for our very, very fuel. It's ridiculous. And doing incredible damage to the Earth, the environment itself. Whether or not you believe that carbon dioxide emitted from civilization causes climate change or not, you cannot disagree that human activity, including the burning of fossil fuels, is incredibly damaging to the environment. Coal power stations release soot that poisons the soil, poisons the air, poisons the water, poisons our bodies. It has to be mined. Coal mining is one of the most dangerous occupations you can do. Miners that don't die in accidents die young from diseases because they inhale coal dust. Oil fires, oil tankers run aground, they sink, they spill their load, it kills seabirds. There's all kinds of other examples I can give you. Oil refineries, they damage they're blots on the landscape, they explode, they kill people. Cars crashing, filling the cities with poisonous fumes. In a world of free energy, that wouldn't happen. There'd be no environmental destruction at all. We would be able to live in harmony with nature. And don't believe all this stuff about overpopulation either. There's not too many people in the world. It's just we're living a destructive lifestyle. So it appears that way. Free energy could take some of the poorest people in the world and lift them out of poverty. At the moment we have many people, over half the world's population below the poverty line. And many people don't even have running water. Half the people in Africa have no access to processed fresh running water at all. A lot of people don't have electricity because you have to pay an electricity bill. You have to pay an electricity bill because energy costs, because we use fossil fuels, which costs money. And over half the people in the world can't afford that. And so they have no electricity. One thing that free energy would do, I think it would greatly reduce this particular imbalance. What you have now is that the third world would be lifted to a standard of living that it's never experienced before. The disparity between the rich Western world and the third world, the developing countries so-called, would be greatly reduced, if not eliminated. There's no reason why Africa, South America, countries like that can't have a standard of living which is as high as anywhere else in the world. We would all, and it wouldn't be the case of the West coming down, it would be the case of the third world coming up. Everyone in the world would have a massively improved standard of living if we had free energy. Just think, for instance, you could desalinate seawater and use that to irrigate farmland. You wouldn't have to worry about droughts anymore. You wouldn't be dependent on fresh water supply. So if the rain failed, doesn't matter, just pump water from the sea. You can't do it now because it's salty. You have to desalinate it. That costs money. You need fuels. You can't afford it. Free energy. Desalinate the water for no cost at all. Pump it using... now, free energy, you could use Schauberger cores. I mean, free energy, the extraction of free energy from the vacuum doesn't require some big industrial method. It can be done using very, very simple techniques. In the case of Victor Schauberger and what he discovered, simply a copper pipe a certain shape immersed in water will extract that 0-point energy. This is the world we could be living in. This is the world we would be living in now if Nikola Tesla had not had his material suppressed. This is long before Roswell. This is the world we could be living in if the technology from the Roswell crash. And this is the thing. When these saucers crash and they're put in hangars, they're studied. They're not just left there lying. They're studied. And I believe that the scientists within the breakaway civilization, the secret space program, not only have gained technology from human inventors that have been suppressed, they have also back-engineered the power plants and propulsion systems of the extraterrestrial craft. Who could possibly object to that? Who could possibly make a fuss about us living in a much, much happier, kind of more productive world for everybody? Eh? Any ideas? Yeah. You're really going to do this? Are you going to go up to the chairman of these big oil companies, just knock on the door, walk in. The chairman's sitting behind a table probably as big as this room. So I've just come to tell you your services are no longer required. Have a nice day. It's okay. You can branch out into other areas. You know. Let me see. You still need oil to make candles, don't you? How about shell candles? Think about that. Shell candles. They're pretty colours. They smell nice. They won't stain your wallpaper. Go on, go for it. There's going to be a big dollar on that, isn't it? Shell candles. What sort of answer do you think you're going to get? Now, joking aside, the oil industry will continue in a world of free energy, but drastically downsized. Oil will literally will only serve only one purpose, basically mineral extraction for plastics, for oil-based products, things like that. That's literally all we would use it for. Now, I'm not saying that the people involved in oil companies are part of any truth embargo and the desire to create a new world order. I think at a higher level it's political, it's about control. For whatever reason, the rationing of energy is very, very important. What fossil fuels do from the point of view of the powers that be, and it's not nice to get inside their mind and think like they think. But from their point of view, their ability to control the flow of energy, because through use of fossil fuels, the fact that it costs, it has to be processed, it can be controlled, gives them control over our lives. It means that they basically have a world order that they created, which they don't want to be disturbed. So it's political, not economic. Or is it political and economic? For lower down, the outer party, so to speak, of these people, it's just simply profit. They don't want their business ruined. Oil is the lubricant and the lifeblood of civilization for these people. It's not only the biggest industry in the world, it is industry in the world. And they know it. And they don't want it to stop. They couldn't cope with the upheaval it would cause for them. But there's more. It goes beyond the energy issue. It goes into the deep levels of culture and sociology. In 1959, at the very dawn of the space age, the Brookings Institute, a think tank from the United States, based in the United States, wrote to NASA. They issued reports they sent to both NASA and to the Russian Soviet Space Agency, stating that if they found evidence of intelligent life out there, it might not be a good idea to shout it from the rooftops. They were concerned about the effects that the revelation of an intelligent civilization beyond the Earth would have on our political structures, our economic structures, and our churches. For whatever reason, the government, the powers that be, do want us to believe that we basically live on this Earth, this little pale blue dot, as Carl Sagan called it, and that it is just a tiny little oasis of life and an infinite cosmic desert of inanimate matter. It's very important to them that we have that vision of the universe. They're lying to us. The universe is alive. Life is everywhere. But they don't want us to know that. Now, I think it may be something to do with the fact that if we knew we were just one planet in a living universe, we would probably gain, as Ronald Reagan said when he was US president, a sense of a unified humanity. Our worldly differences would be greatly reduced in importance. We would start to see ourselves as humans on a planet rather than different racial, religious, cultural groups fighting each other with different conflicting interests, which would mean it would be much, much harder to engineer wars. And the continuous nature of war is essential to control. As George Orwell rightly pointed out in 1984, a true New World Order wouldn't be a singular state. It would be a group of superstates continuously engaged in engineered war. That's how he knew that. This is something he worked out because he knew about the psychological think tanks. He was a member of one of them. I've got an entire presentation on that, about the BBC. And there's more. I should have put a trigger warning on this, shouldn't I? Mind you, you've sat through David Caton's presentation. It's far more gruesome than just this one picture. David Caton goes into more details. I should point out the energy issue is just a part of this, as I was saying. I've done an entire presentation on the things I'd said about energy and the UFO issue. It's called Energy, Politics and UFOs. Have I ever presented that here, Neil? I did that once, yeah. But it's a much longer, more detailed presentation on the issues I raise about the energy situation. But there's so much more going on relating to the UFO issue. Now, these UFOs, these aliens, whatever they are, seem to have a wide variety. As I said earlier, in the debate between Dr Cassidy and Dr. Stephen Greer, they were fighting over this. They're not all nice, they're not all nasty. They seem to exhibit a wide range of behaviours. They seem to have a large number of motives and agendas. There's many, many different species that have been notified. There's virtual taxonomy of various different greys and Nordics and little blue things and stuff like that. Now, what has been happening over the years is that what is often associated with UFO presence is the emergence of animals, dead animals with mysterious injuries. This is the mutilation phenomenon. As I said, David Caton has done an entire presentation on this platform all about that. Here we see a cow, an unfortunate cow. You see here the classic injuries, the eye missing, the jaw stripped. You go around the back, you might find that the genitalia and the rectum have gone. They've been clawed out. Perhaps the blood has been removed. Things like that. I don't know why. There's no explanation that has ever been suggested which explains why this has been done. Whoever or whatever is doing it. It doesn't make sense. It may make sense to it's obviously the only people who, or not people, whoever they are, who's doing it. Only they know why it's being done. Maybe we might find out one day, but at the moment we have no idea. But it is happening. It's happening to all species. It's happening to farm animals, as you see a cow. It happens to wild animals, pets, marine animals, like dolphins and seals have turned up with these injuries. And there's no way to stop it. All animal species are targeted. All animal species are potentially at risk of dying like this. And when I say all species, I do mean all species. I include Homo sapiens in that. Now, that is one area that even some of the researchers into animal mutilations will not go. They want to believe that it's every single species on Earth, except a certain upright ape, which we happen to be members of. Now, we are unique in many ways as an animal. We are apes, as Charles Darwin rightly pointed out. We're quite unusual. We walk upright. We have these unique flat feet. We have a very large brain, which gives us an exceptional intelligence. We regard ourselves as special. We always talk about humans and animals, without the understanding that humans are animals. Now, there's no reason to suppose that an extraterrestrial intelligent creature, especially one that is more advanced than us in terms of intelligence, will have that same attitudes towards humans. We can't expect them to hold us above the rest of the animal kingdom the way we do ourselves. It's quite likely they just lump us in with all the other biomass on this earth to be poked and prodded and done for maybe perhaps for purely dispassionate scientific reasons. They may not, when dead human bodies turn up with these kinds of injuries, which they do, as David Caton has shown you, some of the very extremely alarming pictures of these bodies. When that happens, we can't assume that this is simply malevolence and sadism on the part of whatever's doing it. It may simply be a byproduct of a scientific study. After all, we do all sorts of things to mice and rats in laboratories, don't we? And what do they think of us? We don't hate mice and rats, do we? We just use them. The point is here that as part of the disclosure speech, which Trumpy or Theresa May will be giving on that podium, will have to come this. Disclosure is a one-way street, and it's the first domino in a huge pile. Once one secret is out, everyone watching that disclosure speech, the moment that speech is finished, is going to think, what else? What about this? And the government won't be able to keep it back. They'll have to explain, yes, this is happening. It's happening. It can happen to humans too. It happens to our animals. And we don't know how to stop it. Whatever is doing this can do it with complete impunity, and we have no way of preventing them. And the same goes for the abductions. This affects millions of people around the world, many, many more that have actually spoken out about it. I know people who regularly experience alien contact. And again, it varies an awful lot. Some people actually love their alien contactees. They love the aliens who contact them. They have relationships with them. Some of them believe they're related to them. They see it almost as an extension of their family. Others are sometimes taken and they're examined almost as they're put on a table and they're examined almost as a scientific specimen or a medical curiosity by these creatures. Again, there's many, many different species. And a few suffer injuries, both mental and physical, and there have been deaths as a result of encounters with these creatures. Now, I'm going to show you something, okay? This is why I'm wearing a short-sleeved shirt. I don't know how many of you can see from here. I have a mark on my arm. Do you want me to get closer to the camera, Neil?
I'll zoom in.
Right you are. It's enough light. Yeah. Can you see a circular mark with two dots on my arm? You can come closer afterwards. I'll show you in more detail.
Yep.
I noticed that a few years ago. I just noticed it was on my arm. I didn't know what it was. It just appeared there, and I didn't think anything more of it. Then I was at the basis conference at Woodborough, and there was a guy there with scanners. He was there with some scanners, and he was offering to scan people for implants using various devices. There was a radio frequency pulse detector, electromagnetic field detector, and a metal detector. And I thought, well, I don't need to go. I was talking to some of the other people there, and I said, I don't need to go to that. I've got no implants in me. I've never been abducted. And this guy, there was a guy there who'd come all the way from Malta to the conference. He looked at me and says, Ben, don't say that. And he looked at me as if he knew something. And I was like, recoiled back from that. I don't know. He said, don't say that. You need to be scanned, Ben. He said. I don't know who this guy was. I know he came from Malta, all the way from Malta to be at this conference. So I went and got scanned. And guess what? There is actually something in my arm, exactly where that mark is, that is radiating 8 megahertz pulses. It is also has an electromagnetic field on it. It registered nothing on the metal detector. And this absolutely gobsmacked me, because I have no memory of any experience that would lead me to believe that something like this had been done to me. Because I know people who regularly have abductions like this sometimes find non-biological objects in their bodies. You can have them removed by surgery if they're operable. Some of them are not. It costs a lot of money too, because you can't exactly. If I wanted to get this removed surgically, I'd have to go to my GP, and firstly he'd have to scan me, and with an MRI, probably, which costs a lot of money, because you want to go private, it's about £3,000, and I can't afford that. If you want to get it done on the NHS, you have to persuade your GP to refer you for it, and he would refer me, wouldn't he? But to the psychiatric clinic, not to MRI. Space aliens have put something in my arm. Get out the straitjacket and the amitriptyline. Yeah. So it's a very, very difficult thing. So basically, I'm not taking any further action on this object in my arm. I can't afford to do anything about it, and I don't particularly need to. I don't believe it's affecting my life at all. So I'm just maintaining the situation and doing nothing for now. And I'll probably keep it that way. I know someone, actually, a friend of mine, she had an object in her nose, but she went to Greece, and she had an operation. She had to travel all the way to Greece, have an operation that cost £2,000, have the thing removed. And they took it out, they gave it to her in a little pot. She had an x-ray and it was gone, but she went back home, and she sent off the device to the little thing they took out, the metal sliver, to be examined by a scientist. She went to bed one day, she woke up in the morning, it had come back. Someone or something had replaced the object that was removed. So even if you have the thing removed, it may not be gone for good. Again, we've got to say to these politicians, this is happening. They're going to have to admit this is happening. They know it's happening. They can't stop it. There's one thing that governments don't like, is to admit that they can't do something for us, because we might not vote for them next time. Oh, I'm not voting for that Mrs. Theresa May. She can't do anything to stop these damn abductions. The truth of the matter is, neither can any of the other candidates. We are helpless. Is that the girl I met earlier in the pub? Tell her I'll call her back. So this is going to be going through everybody's head when they're sitting in front of the TV watching Trumpy or the Wicked Witch give their disclosure speech. There we are. That is a problem. Now, the government are always frightened that everyone's going to panic. I don't know why, because people generally don't panic. We didn't panic in the war with rationing and things like that. But Winston Churchill, incidentally, thought we would panic about UFOs. That's a big subject, but Winston Churchill had a research project on UFOs during the war. I don't have time to tell you any more about that. And then we come on to another issue, weaponization. This here is the Right Honourable Paul Hellyer MP. Now, he is a former Defence Minister of Canada. And so apart from Sir Eric Gary, he's the most senior political figure ever to come forward and speak openly about the UFO subject. Now, he's an amazing chap, actually, 94 years old. He tours the world speaking at conferences on UFOs. He says that UFOs are as real as the aircraft that fly above our heads. He's a trained engineer, a veteran statesman, and he's holding a book. He's holding there an interesting book. Now, Andrew Johnson has spoken about this many, many times. This book is Where Did the Towers Go by Dr. Judy Wood, and it is an investigation of the destruction of the World Trade Center at the 9/11 attacks. And what Dr. Judy Wood has discovered is that a directed energy weapon was used to destroy these buildings It wasn't thermite and bombs, as some people in the truth movement say. It was a directed energy weapon. This book proves it. For more details, look at Andrew Johnson's talks at High Wycombe Paranormal. Now, the thing about it is that the directed energy weapon Dr. Judy believes comes from the research by someone called John Hutchison, who's an inventor, a Canadian tinkerer, as they sometimes call it in the derogatory language of the skeptics, a private inventor who's worked on various types of electromagnetic interference, and it's possible that some technology might have come from back-engineered UFOs as well. Either way, the secret government, the breakaway civilization, they haven't just packed it away and sat on it. They developed it, yes, but they've developed it for their own purposes, and they've kept it to themselves. They kept it away from us. It's like that film Black Panther. Has anyone seen Black Panther? It's a very good film. It's about a secret. It's like a closed-off country in Africa that has developed free energy and anti-gravity, and they kept it for themselves away from the rest of the world. At the end of the film, they actually come out and they give it as a gift to the rest of the world. And you have that disclosure moment. It's an amazing movie. Do go and see it. It's very, very good. But they haven't, you see. They've turned it into a weapon, a very destructive weapon, potentially a weapon far more destructive than even the hydrogen bomb, that took the world's biggest buildings and turned them into dust, a huge cloud of dust. So what is going to be, bearing in mind all the information I've given you this evening, what is going to be with the response from the public when they hear this? Because they're going to hear the government give out this disclosure speech saying, yes, we have UFOs. Yes, we know there are UFOs. We know about free energy. We've known for over a century that there's free energy. And we kept it secret. That's true. But we had your best interests at heart. Well, actually, we didn't have your best interests at heart. We had our best interests at heart. We kept it secret at enormous cost to you. You suffered an enormous deficit as a result of this. 1 billion of you died as a result of this secrecy. 1 billion people died of poverty, wars for oil, famine, and all kinds of other structural violence within society, as that guy from the Zeitgeist calls it. Because we kept this energy from you, because we kept this secret. There is no spin doctor in the world today who could possibly dig any politician out of that hole. What are they going to do? Promise to bring back school milk? Resign and call a general election? No, absolutely not. This is going to be the answer. This is the only answer we're going to give. And I personally will be at the head of that mob. I will have my torch and my pitchfork. We will be after their blood. And they'll have to admit that it's not just the secrets that they kept, it's the fact that they kept them at all is going to be the consequence of willing disclosure. This is why I disagree with Stephen Bassett. This is why it cannot possibly be as simple as he thinks it's going to be. And within the secret boardrooms where they're discussing this issue, all the points that I've raised will be going through their heads. All these points will be on the table, and they'll be making the same conclusions that I have from their perspective, and they're going to be able to say, no way, we can't do it. Does that mean disclosure cannot happen? Now, again, I disagree with Stephen Bassett on this, but there's also a lot of internal conflict within me. Because every so often, you do hear some politicians say some remarkable things, mainstream politicians. This is Hillary Clinton, who is not US president, thank goodness. But she became worryingly close to it, and Stephen Bassett wanted her to be because he believed that she would be the disclosure president. I think that's not true, and I've discussed this with Steve, but what's interesting is that she said some really interesting things, and so did several people on the staff, including a guy who's become a bit infamous lately, John Podesta. Hillary Clinton may declassify government UFO secrets. Well, not all of them, but I'll tell you what, her campaign manager, John Podesta, I forget all the Pizzagate stuff. I'll just focus on his work on UFOs. He's very outspoken about UFOs. He's done speeches on UFOs. He said, people deserve the truth. People have a need to know. People have a right to know. And presumably, I follow him on Twitter because just to find out what he has to say about this. Now, presumably, Hillary was happy to have him run her campaign, even though he was talking like this, which is really quite, it says an awful lot, doesn't it, about her attitude. Now, funny enough, her husband Bill also seemed to have some kind of interest. He was on the Jimmy Kimmel show, and he made a few cryptic references to UFOs. Have you seen the speech where he answers a letter from Ryan from Belfast? Have you seen that? Ryan, you want to know whether aliens crashed at Roswell in July 1947? Well, Ryan, they haven't told me, and I want to know. Now, Steve thinks that Clinton may be signaling he may be putting it on the record because he's concerned about perhaps truth and reconciliation issues after this willing disclosure, which is just one of the many issues associated with willing disclosure, which I don't have time to go into now, but is covered in literature, including books by Richard Dolan. And he may be just wanting to maybe wipe his hands clean. I don't know, because there's a part of me that just seems to, at times, especially when I listen to Steve, I can believe that this is feasible, that somehow we will see the Trumpster and the Wicked Witch addressing the nation and saying and just telling us the truth. I could be wrong. I could be wrong about everything I've said about here. And they are, for whatever process, they are going to go for disclosure. Alternatively, they can just continue with the truth embargo. The immovable object can just remain immovable. But for how long? It's not... I think the problems associated with the world now and our path towards the New World Order are so desperate that, and they have had so much trouble instituting them because they don't have everything their way. This is why sometimes I think Steve might be right. The secret government, the breakaway civilization, doesn't have everything its way. The Illuminati has made mistakes and it has lost. It has lost ground, especially in 2016. It lost a lot of ground. It's gained some of that back, but if it doesn't have anything its way, then why should it have the truth embargo completely safe and completely unbreakable? Maybe that's the next thing to go, and we will have willing disclosure. But we've got to be careful. We've got to be careful that we don't fall for disinformation as part of this willing disclosure process. Now, when Bryce Zabel, who created the series Dark Sky, spoke at Leeds, the Leeds Exopolitics Expo, he said, we don't know if the aliens are good or the aliens are bad. If it turns out that the aliens are bad, and the government has been keeping this secret, well, because there's a threat out there from the extraterrestrials, then we might just have to forgive them for the truth embargo and get together to save the planet. And I asked a question in the Q&A. I asked Bryce Zabel, I said, Bryce, is it possible the government are going to say they're bad even if they're not, just so they can dig themselves out of that hole of that explanation, just so that we will forgive them and unite? And he was forced to concede, yes, that's a possibility. And yeah, exactly. How much time? Oh, plenty. Oh, there's loads. I'll just check in my own recording there. This brings us back to Karl Rosin, what she said at the Disclosure Project press conference. The fact that the last card might be a faked alien invasion or an engineered interplanetary war. Now, this is a still from an amazing film. It's called The Earth versus Flying Saucers, which is not a very good title because it gives away the plot. It is about an alien invasion. What happens is Earth is basically invaded by an army of aliens that fly around in these disc-shaped objects. It's an amazing film, right back in 1956. It was made with the assistance of ufologists. You can tell because of the way these craft behave, the noises they make and the way they move, they got real ufologists on the production team to assist with the creation of this film. It's a really good film. It was made into a brilliant spoof by Tim Burton called Mars Attacks. I love that film. It's brilliant. So the plot is very similar to a more recent film called Independence Day. It's a 1996 movie, I believe, which again is about evil aliens invading and destroying the Earth. It's a lot worse. This film, Earth versus Flying Saucers, is a lot better in my view, even though it's much older. The possibility of an alien invasion happening and an attempt to destroy the Earth by extraterrestrials, of course, cannot be ruled out, as Nick Pope would say. We can't rule it out, but it seems unlikely if it hasn't happened yet. And as I said, the behaviour of the extraterrestrials doesn't indicate that they are posing an immediate threat to us, apart from some individuals. We appear to be under some detached observance. That's the consensus of their activities at the moment. But if you want to create a new world order, a global tyrannical government, there's no better way than, as Reagan said, if we were faced with an interplanetary threat, an extraterrestrial threat from beyond our Earth, we would unite and fight. To unite, we'd have to create a world army, a world government, a coalition of force to repel these alien invaders. And, of course, just like all other regimes that are created in times of emergency, they don't just go back to normal at the end of the emergency, they continue. They don't give away the power they've gained. Which is why we have to be very cautious if the government say things like, oh, there are evil aliens out there where you need to unite. Forget Brexit now. We've got to stay in the EU because we're going to create an EU interplanetary defence organisation. I mean, even Boris Johnson would have to agree to that, wouldn't he? I mean, even he wouldn't argue against it. Do you see what I mean? This is what David Icke calls problem, reaction, solution. Now, this is the ultimate version of that. Now, I believe it's based on the evidence there was going to be such a false flag alien invasion at the 2012 London Olympics. It didn't happen. The reason it didn't happen is because too many people were expecting it. People like Ian R. Crane were speaking out about it. And as a result, do you remember those T-shirts that went around? The Apocalyptics, we're ready. I wish I'd got one of those, actually. They were brilliant. So so they had to abort. I mean, I knew they'd abort it. I knew they'd abort it, right? Just shortly before the Olympics began. Nick Pope, his name keeps coming up, doesn't it? Wrote an article, I think it was in the Independent, about the possibility of a false flag alien invasion of the London Olympics, and how lots of conspiracy theorists were saying this. And it was actually viral marketing for a computer game, and he was actually being paid by the producers of a computer game. This is very interesting. There are no complete answers to this conundrum now. I can't give you a solid answer at the end of this speech. I don't know what the path to disclosure is going to be. I doubt it's going to be the way Bassett and Greer envisage it, but it has to happen one way or another. Maybe it will be when we break into a deserted Area 51. And that may be disclosure. I don't know. But I can speculate. Which is why I've written a book, and I've actually got one here with me. Roswell Rising, a novel of disclosure. Now, this is rather like George Orwell. Now George Orwell was a member of the Fabian Society, and he wanted to expose what they were doing, the psychological warfare they were playing on the people. Now, if he'd written a factual expose of the Fabian Society, how would the world remember him? George Orwell, nutty conspiracy theorist. He wrote this ridiculous book saying there's a conspiracy to take over the world by controlling our minds. What a loony. But instead he wrote 1984, a piece of allegorical fiction where he gave out that information in a symbolic format within a story. There's many other authors like Ayn Rand have done the same. So I decided to do that too. What happened was Stephen Bassett was actually on a radio show. And he said, I'd love to write a novel about disclosure, about what would happen if we had disclosure. Just a fictional story to say what would really happen if we had the truth instead of lies. And as I was listening to Steve, I suddenly realised, Steve said, oh, I can't do that, but I hope someone does. And I thought, well, I can do that. I've written fiction. I can write. So I wrote to Steve. I said, Steve, I'll write this book. And Steve was very encouraging. So I got to work, and that's the book, Roswell Rising, a novel of disclosure. This is a book about what would happen if we had disclosure. And what's more, the story continues in this. Roswell revealed a world after disclosure. Now, this is the second part. This here is the second part. It's a sequel. I'm writing a third one too, so there'll be a trilogy eventually. This continues the story after the last book ends. So, shameless plug over. If you want, I've sold loads of them at Probe. I had about 10 of these. I've got just these two left. Now they're £10 each, but if anyone's got £15, you can have both of them, and I'll sign them for you. Now this isn't a book. This is a book called Evans Land I wrote years ago. That's just that's a £5 if you want it. Okay, it's not another novel. That's my first novel. Okay, so that's my books. And don't forget, Dreaming Saucers. Now, this is a conference that's happening on the 12th and 13th of May in Oxford. It's just a weekend ticket is £30, one-day ticket £20, and the people speaking, Ben Emlyn-Jones, Neil Geddes Ward, you see him over there, Deborah Hatswell, Bigfoot researcher, Nick Hayes, Philip, there's the Kinsellas, Marcus Allen, Ellis Taylor, Tony Topping, and there's a live free Truth Tour of Oxford. This is going to be a great conference, so please do get to that if you can. So lots of exciting things coming up, and that's all about me, and I just want to thank you all for listening. And do I have time for questions?
Yeah, sure.
Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Anyone want a book, by the way? Anyone got some money spare for a book?
I'll ask about your thoughts on the retirement of Stanton Friedman.
The retirement, oh yes. So Stanton Friedman, who is the godfather of Roswell research, has retired. And I mean, to be honest, I mean, at the age he is, he's 88. It's understandable.
But he's younger than Paul Hare.
Yeah, he is. Paul Hare is 94. But to be honest, I mean, I mean, I met Stan. I mean, Stan's been on my show. I actually had him on my show, and he's done spectacular work, and he's an amazing chap. He's an amazing speaker. He's an amazing author, amazing researcher. He debates the skeptics. He's the guy who basically got the Roswell incident out into the world, because in 1978 he actually met Jesse Marcel, the witness, the principal witness to the Roswell incident, and they basically did a long interview, and it resulted in a book called The Roswell Incident by Charles Berlitz and William Moore, which Friedman helped research, and that was basically the book that launched the entire situation. So I wish him all the best, I really do. I don't blame him for wanting to retire. I mean, the age he is, it's no wonder. I think he's done, most people would retire long before then, so I wish him and his family all the best. He had a heart attack a few years ago. It's just got too much for him.
Do you think it might diminish the harms of movement?
No, Stan has actually he's been scaling down his work a lot in the last few years because of his ailing health, and he is not, like I say, he's getting older, and many other people have taken over from where he left off, inspired by him. If he hadn't happened, those people probably wouldn't have even thought about doing it. So he's done more than anyone else could do, and I think he should just be pleased with that. I'm satisfied with what he's done with his life. And I wish him all the best. I wish him a long, happy retirement.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
So,
when you mentioned about the directed entry weapons, in Dr. Judy Wood's book, she stopped short of actually going into any detail about that. She said that wasn't the purpose of the book. And if Nicholas Tesla had done it over 100 years ago, how come that nobody's replicated it up to date? Because if somebody's done it over 100 years ago, with the knowledge and techniques that we've got now, you would expect it to be replicated?
well, it has been replicated. I mean, the thing is, John Hutchison replicated it. The thing about it is, when everyone tries to replicate it, what happens is that usually the government gets involved. This happened with John Hutchison. In 1982, he was visited by a chap called Colonel John Alexander, who worked for the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, DARPA. And now the skeptics will say that John Hutchison is a magician who uses strings to produce his effect and all kinds of other trickery. But, Alexander spent 3 months with this guy, studying what he did. Shortly after that, all the equipment from his laboratory was cancelled, was captured and impounded by the Canadian government, and Hutchison was basically got in trouble. I mean, there's all kinds of things happen when you get involved in this. Sometimes that happens. Other times you might be approached by a nice man in a suit who offers you a development contract, and he asks to buy the rights from you, or to loan the rights in exchange, of course, for a non-disclosure agreement which you have to sign. And they take everything away and they say, "Thank you very much. We'll be in touch. Enjoy spending the money, sir." And then you go away. You have your money, but you lose your work, and you can't say anything about it because of the NDA. So there's all kinds of ways where people who get into this kind of research end up in trouble. There's a good website called KeelyNet which talks about this.
Question for me?
Neil, yeah.
Yeah, you said you were going to mention Tom DeLong.
Oh, of course, yes. Now, this is something I forgot to do that. Thanks. I forgot to bring that up in the actual main talk. As I said, Project Blue Book stopped in 1969. In 2011, the government released a statement where they said that they had not that they had not actually investigated UFOs ever since then, because basically they were not of any significance. This was a lie. Now, what happened was there was a declassification just last year where the government admitted that they had a research project that ran from 2007 to 2012. It was run through Congress, and several people involved. There's a chap called Luis Elizondo from the Department of Defense, and Bob Bigelow, who you may have heard of. He's a rich philanthropist who funds a lot of UFO and paranormal research. He was involved too, as a private contractor. Now, Tom DeLonge is a rock star who started this thing called the To the Stars Academy, and he's got together a number of people from inside government to act as witnesses. It's very similar to Dr. Stephen Greer, just a little bit later. I'm concerned about Tom DeLonge in the same way I am about Greer, about whether he's being used, whether he's being fed false information. I mean, he's definitely being made to feel he's a very important chap, and basically he's been approached and told that the government want to have a controlled disclosure situation, and Tom DeLonge is the guy they want to do it. I'm not sure. I know Tom DeLonge is a sincere chap. He runs a bookshop in California, USA, where you buy books on UFO and paranormal and conspiratorial subjects. I know someone who's been to his bookshop who lives nearby. I think he's a sincere chap, but some of the people involved in his project I'm a bit dubious about. Hal Puthoff, for example, is a CIA psychologist. And that covers a multitude of sins. Hal Puthoff is the man who gave us Uri Geller. In 1972, when Geller first turned up on the stages, he was investigated by the Stanford Research Institute by Hal Puthoff and his colleague Russell Targ, and they declared that he was. The funny thing happened because there was two streams. There was a guy called Bill Nye, who I'm very suspicious about, who said that Geller was a fake, and so that in a sense gave them the excuse to shut up about him. Targ and Puthoff, though, didn't in private. They kept working with Geller, and I believe recruited him as a remote viewer, a psychic spy. Now, Geller admitted this in 2004 to the journalist John Rosin, and in 2014, he actually made a public confession and said that he had been a remote viewer and a spy at various times for Mossad and the CIA. So, and I believe that Russell Targ, was actually instrumental in that. So now, why would Russell Targ suddenly be involved in some kind of disclosure movement? It doesn't make sense. I don't trust him. I don't think Tom DeLonge should trust him either. And so far, unfortunately, this whole issue, which I came into a bit late because unfortunately it coincided with the publication of my second book. So I had the Roswell reveal. So I had to deal with that. Unfortunately, I didn't have any real input. I came in and I realised that they haven't actually made much progress, really. They had an initial burst, they had their press conference, things like that, but then since then, nothing much has happened. So we'll have to wait and see whether it goes any further.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions?
Yeah. Not really a question. I watched a thing on Netflix. It was a film probably a couple of months ago. It was a kind of a documentary film about some chap in America who was scanning for these implants and removing them. Have you ever seen that?
Yeah, it's a guy called Roger Lear, Dr. Roger Lear, his name is.
Yeah, he died.
He died a couple of years ago. Now, he was a very, very interesting man. He was actually a podiatrist. He looked after feet. And he suddenly discovered, because feet are a very common place for implants to gather, he was detecting these things on x-rays. And he eventually got to the point where people were coming to him with these implants and he would remove them for them, for a fee. He had to do it privately. And he's been studying these things. And they're very often very strange objects. They seem to be made of some kind of metal, but not any alloy that's produced in any forge in we know of. They're not standard alloys. They're often covered with some strange unidentifiable substance that seems to stop the body's immune system reacting to it. And as I said, whoever or whatever is putting these things in people's bodies, they want to keep them there. Very often, if you have one removed, it will be replaced. You'll wake up one morning and find it's back. So what purpose they serve, I don't know. It's difficult to know exactly what they're there for. I mean, concerns me. I've got one in my arm, and I've got no idea how it got there and why it's there at all. I really don't.
Smart meter.
Yeah, something like that.
You said it generates or emits a frequency of 8 meg. I mean, is there any kind of data contained within that signal?
All I know is, the actual device that's a good question. The actual device that Miles used only simply picks up the pulse. It picks up the radio frequency. I don't think it can actually record it. But that may be something that's possible. I could maybe do that. That's something that could be done if the pulse recurs. I mean, I don't know how often the pulse comes around, and I've not had it scanned since, so I don't know. Does anyone want any of these books? Anyone got £15 on them? What's a pair of brilliant books?
I don't read novels.
No. All right. Well, this is okay, but it's a fictional, but it is about these subjects It's a story, but it's about these subjects that I. So has anyone got £5 and wants a copy of one of the last few copies of Evans Land? Anybody got £5? Anyone? Oh. You've got one already, have you, Chris? Oh, it's a good doorstop. Okay. Oh, yeah, it doesn't have. Unfortunately, I was sort of a different person when I wrote that. Never mind. Well, thank you very much. You can get them on Amazon if you want them. And thanks for watching, everybody. Thank you very much for coming along and listening to Ben's talk. Very interesting. Thank you, Ben, for doing it. We appreciate you. Thanks for having me back. Thanks for having me back, Neil. So I'd just like to say thanks very much, Ben. A round of applause for Ben. Thank you.